Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast.
Welcome to the Tossing Grenades at Windmills. I'm Rhombus Tix, and this is a series of short stories from my old original writing days, like almost 20 years ago. Some are good, some are terrible. I've only skipped one so far in terms of actually broadcasting it because the changes of tense in Wake Up Yulee literally made no sense and didn't go anywhere or do anything. So, and it's a half an hour long. So I decided ultimately I'm skipping that episode. If reader or fan demand truly wants to hear what I think is so far the worst story I've ever written, then let me know at redanvilcreative.com and I will recreate that puppy. In the meantime, here's a short but much more interesting story in the series I'm calling Swamp Castle, in reference to the Monty Python sketch where they built a castle and it sank into the swamp, and then they built another castle and then that sank into the swamp, etc., etc., etc. The theory being that my writing career is pretty much Swamp Castle. By all definition, I have no business writing or selling my fiction, but I still am anyway. So here I am, and here is To Define Humanity. This was not his fault. Mole Drat, quote, Drat, end quote, local, felt mostly terrible. Due to circumstances slightly beyond his control, he had single-handedly destroyed every human being in the universe. Now he had to go through the terrible bother of putting them back together. The alien device was, perhaps, just perhaps, slightly more complicated than he had thought. He had estimated he'd have the problem solved by breakfast. A nagging voice in the back of his mind told him it would probably be a lot harder than that. He hated that little voice. If he'd listened to it, he never would have achieved greatness. Then again, if he'd listened to it, he probably wouldn't have caused the extinction of yet another species. Besides, this time was different. Now he knew what he was doing. Okay, fine. He probably had one or two minor technical glitches to work out. But when dealing with a machine that could do nearly anything, the only real limits had to come from within. This required a creative solution to an unusual problem. He took a deep breath, stood, and calmly looked around the room. The machine was remarkably efficient in its execution of his commands. His commands. He was a god. He simply wasn't a very good one yet. He could, after all, be honest with himself. Without truth, what else was there? He also knew that he would learn in time. Focus. He had to focus. He told the machine, "Make me the ultimate man." Any machine built by a race as wise and powerful as the Yulee would surely have understood that ultimate man meant great wisdom and intelligence. He had been shocked at first by the complete lack of noticeable transformation. The simplicity of the affair occurred to him nicely. The machine, in its literal thinking, had made him the ultimate, the very last. Apparently, it had no qualms about the political correctness of gender and language either, because it had erased all the women from the camp as well. Cautiously, he told the machine, "Restore that which previously existed." The translation matrix, backed up in small green lines of text, said, "System error." That was new. Apparently the machine did not interpret everything he told it literally. Why couldn't it have bothered to ask what he meant by ultimate man? Stupid machine. "Restore humanity to their existence," the machine said. "Define word phrase humanity." Drat patiently responded, "All right, let's try this another way. Approximately," he checked his watch, 7 hours and 29 minutes ago, you performed a function of my request. I want you to undo the effects of this request and place all of existence in the same previous state of being. Unable to perform requested function, memory capacity, incapable of autonomous storage of 12,414,115,155,982 sentient minds. Undo cannot be processed. At this point, the annoying little voice returned and was shouting all kinds of unpleasant things in the back of Drat's mind. He shut it out and concentrated on the task at hand. 3 days and 3 miserable failures later, he retreated to the chamber. His first attempt had led to an all-male species with endless varieties of his own physical forms, erasure. When he started the next day with a basic male and female model, he shuddered to think of some of the prototypes the machine had showed him until he got the formula right. He ended up with a female and male versions of himself who spent the vast majority of their time performing the most vulgar acts imaginable. While they weren't eating, drinking, or fornicating, they had clubbed each other for domination of territory. They had no sense of purpose beyond living from one moment to the next. Anyone else would have been stunned at so much progress in so short a time, but Drat Local felt he needed to be 50% more efficient than the Almighty. If the mythic being of ancient times had done it in 7 days, why couldn't he do it in 3.5? Simple. He had it. He had exactly the idea he wanted, and he knew where to take it. He told the machine, "The problem thus far has been your requisite definition of humanity. Therefore, I want you to define humanity as I would define it in physical manifestation. You are to give it the highest ideals, nobility and principles and significance of beings. Do you understand these instructions?" The machine replied, "Yes." "Then make it manifest." An instant later, a doppelganger of himself appeared. At first, Drat thought it was some failure of the machine's purpose again, but he noticed subtle differences. The eyes held a kindness to them that he noticed on children. The smile had a distinct lack of cynicality that had been layered on from Drat's denial of the works of others. The thing that caught his attention most, however, was the large disintegration pistol pointed in his direction. Drat was unable to form a cry of protest before the duplicate pulled the trigger, sending hordes of carbon, oxygen, and a wide variety of lipids discorporating into the atmosphere. The doppelganger turned and spoke to the machine. "The simple solution to the problem is to create a temporal feedback loop and eliminate my own existence from the cosmos. Will this effect undo the actions that occurred 87.14 hours ago and restored the existence of 12,414,115,155,982 sentient minds you did not have memory for?" "Yes," the machine replied with electronic confidence. "Then execute." And the inner voice was at peace for never having been at its present best. So this is a short and sweet little story, and I'm actually going to say that it's the best one in the series so far as compared to Wake Up Yuli, which has a sapient pencil and a sex pot back when I was Mormon. Like I said, if there's a horde of fans out there that want to just hear gibberish, then feel free to let me know. In the meantime, I'll talk about this story. So there's some things that work and some things that don't work. The things that don't work is there's no real backstory. It's implied, but what is this machine? Okay, so it can do anything, but why can it do anything? The clear subtext here is that Drat has been part of an alien expedition to find said machine, that said machine can theoretically do anything, and that he fucked up majorly and wiped out humanity from existence. It's an amusing story, and the idea was a good one. More importantly, I now remember, having read this story, that this was the first short story I wrote when I started writing short stories back when I was around 30. I had turned 30. I had a number of jobs. I'd always kind of played at writing. Somewhere I'll find the really, really old stories that probably exist only in print form. But this is arguably the first piece of writing in my writing career, because I don't really consider the stuff I wrote in college, that wasn't even Swamp Castle, is what I'm saying. That was more like Sandcastle while I was dreaming of eventually writing Swamp Castle. And this was, Swamp Castle 1.0. And ironically, it's a stronger story than the other ones I've read so far. There's a lot that I tell and don't show, but there's also a market for short stories that are 1,000 words or less, which this one clearly is. And it does some things really right. The small detail of 12,414,115,155,982. people is a very nice little detail. My propensity for making up hard to pronounce, hard to remember names for my characters, that I sometimes still do, was terrible. Quiescence Prow is a name you remember, but it's weird. Chester Arthurson is so bland it's completely forgettable, and Darla, I can't even remember Darla's last name. The point is that names matter, and Drat Local is a really, really crappy name. I could see myself rewriting this story. If I was going to rewrite it, I don't think I could do it in 1,000 words or less. And if I had to do it in 1,000 words or less, it would focus more on, I think, Drat's inner struggle. The gimmick at the end where a perfect version of himself comes in and fixes the problem is cute, but it's been done to death. And I'm not saying that this particular story has been done to death. I do admit that I do have, what I lack for talent in writing, I have a complete propensity to come up with original ideas that if somebody has thought of it, very few people have. But I do know that, for example, that while this particular, make me the ultimate human bit hasn't been done before, I've definitely read and seen stories where humans get access to vast power and fuck it up. It's called the Infinity Gauntlet or the Cosmic Cube. Comics have done it a lot. And there's a lot bigger fuck-ups in comics than any character I've ever written, except for possibly the Sapient Pencil and Wake Up Yuli. So anyway, it's a short little story. There's not that much to talk about. So enjoy, and I'll talk to you later.
This has been the Tossing Grenades at Windmills podcast. Buy my book, Have Name Will Travel, at Amazon and other markets. RedAnvilCreative.com contains all our podcasts. Copyright
2022!
To fight the forces of evil!